What is up, everybody? This is Alex from IHE TV. I rewatched 28 Years Later and I want to talk through the movie. Got a bunch of new thoughts, got screenshots. This might be quite long, so I'm just going to get into it. So Danny Boyle's one of the last great British directors who are alive, I guess. They're kind of dropping like flies. We got this selection here. Well, Tony Scott isn't alive, but sprinkling Ken Loach, Mike Leigh. This is kind of all we've got going on at this point. Of course, Alex Garland too, the writer of the film. And the writer of the original 28 Days, has many films of his own that are excellent. And on rewatch, my overall kind of takeaway was, there were things I didn't notice about the film. I liked it about the same, maybe slightly more, but the things that bugged me on that first watch also bugged me on a rewatch. So I'm going to go through some of these screenshots I've taken, talk about some of my thoughts on the film, some of the moments or scenes that stood out to me. Funnily enough, we're starting on Teletubbies, which is how the film begins, and I don't think anyone predicted that would be how the film begins. Oh, and before I get deeper, obviously, this is going to have full spoilers for the movie, so watch it for yourself first, if you care about that sort of thing. So outside of the obvious themes of family, coming of age, fatherhood, masculinity, one of the big things I really picked up on rewatch was the idea of legacy and history, and more specifically the death of it, the death of a legacy, specifically through the lens of Britain, the UK. I have a feeling it's partially why this film hasn't connected with a lot of places, a lot of people. A lot of the commentary of the film is quite dependent on you having an understanding of a lot of British culture, where we are as a country, a lot of stuff that's going to speak louder to you if you understand it than if you've never been here or don't know much about the UK, in a way that didn't really affect days or weeks. While I really like Days, it does still work just on a base zombie level movie, which I think is also one of the biggest issues people have with this. They're expecting more of like a baseline zombie kind of movie, and the way it subverts that, to me, is what makes this stand out in a genre that is dead and tired, pardon the pun. But like, what is there to do with zombies at this point? So I feel like this approach, this much of a time jump, and making it almost more of a fantasy film. I'm talking almost like high fantasy, not the fantasy of there being a zombie virus. I'm talking like medieval, Middle Ages style of fantasy, which makes sense thematically with this whole idea of legacy and history, which is communicated through the visuals, the plot, the characters, and I'll bring it up more as we go through. So in the Sardon Cast review, I made the mistake of saying that the whole film was set in Scotland, because I guess I mistook this opening scene as being where the whole film is set, with the opening scene being the establishing of a young Jimmy and his father, reminding us of what the outbreak looked like, establishing the threat of the virus, eviscerating a bunch of kids watching Teletubbies, an important bit of British pop culture that feeds into Jimmy's personality, or what little we know of it. Love this shot of the upside down cross. That comes back later on. Not only is history and legacy a big part of this, but so is the idea of ceremony. Multiple uses of churches throughout the film. The main location in the film is called, in real life, Holy Island, where the characters in the film have this coming-of-age ceremony. You have Dr. Kelson and his temple and his Latin death ceremonies. Really cool ongoing through line, which makes sense to me in like an apocalyptic scenario, that faith and ceremony would be a backbone to keeping everyone as sane as they can be. I always like taking a screenshot of the opening text. I love it as a writing challenge as far as like catching people up, setting the scene without word vomiting, keeping it simple. I guess I'd thought that they threw 28 weeks later to the side more than they actually do. I guess this line here is referencing the end where it's shown to have gone to Paris, but it was driven back, didn't take over the world, which I think is much more interesting as a setting, to just literally have the UK stranded and isolated and be an entire quarantine zone on an island. It kind of makes sense that you could contain it that way. Then of course the obvious parallels to Brexit being the big one. I see so much of Brexit in the politics. The Holy Island is a microcosm of the UK and its relationship to Europe. Incredible location that I really want to visit now. It's actually a real place, way up north in the country, almost in Scotland, but tucked away up here. The history here is just so fascinating to me. It's one of the best things about the UK. It's so dense and rich with history. There are ruins everywhere and all these like warring cultures that have smashed it down, rebuilt it. The island was originally home to a monastery which was destroyed during the Viking invasions but re-established following the Norman conquest of England. This is so cool. And while it feeds into that kind of history, from a logical standpoint, this is like an ideal place to live in something like a zombie virus, with it being protected by the Holy Island Causeway. This does just sound like fantasy stuff, doesn't it? It's so cool. And only having certain times of the day, depending on the tide, that you can travel across. Really great idea. Yeah, so British history being a big through line here. If you pay attention to how many St. George flags are listed throughout the movie, so going back to the history, the Middle Ages, Crusades, evoke something old. And the connotations this flag has, depends on who you ask nowadays, but I think it's an intentional choice that they specifically didn't use the Union Jack. Because this film isn't about union, it's about isolation and kind of splinter groups. And this will come back as we go along. Yeah, this looks like a Middle Ages period piece, which I love how that clashes later on with characters that come from a part of the world that aren't trapped in, I think it's 2002 Britain, that's been like paused and if anything has regressed. They're like building forts now and using bow and arrows and living in these little communes. Love how much of the film is tangible and real and practically shot in their own location, sells the world they're establishing, and just looks gorgeous. We're introduced to Spike, our new protagonist, in this very shot showing off this Power Rangers minifigure, which, did I say minifigure? I'm so Lego-brained. Action figure. Power Rangers action figure representing, I guess, childhood, innocence, and with this being a coming-of-age kind of story and about him growing up and being forced into these new responsibilities. I like how they use this childhood imagery, the Teletubbies, Power Rangers, as a symbol of what one might have to let go of or leave in their past to transition into adulthood. I say as I look around my room and see Lego bricks everywhere. Lots of nice subtle world building with the visuals. It just doesn't have characters stopping and being like, this is where we get all our resources. This is how we shower. This da-da-da. It all explains it through this tight editing, set design. I think it communicates the stakes of the world and how they live quite well. This is the moment where he puts the Power Rangers figure in his bag, but then decides at the last moment, no, you know what, you're staying behind. Showing that he's growing up and there's no space for Power Rangers flips and violence. Or is there? Cinematography in general is pretty incredible. So much variety, it's unpredictable. You'll get quirky little shots like this. We see Aaron Taylor-Johnson beside himself, kind of leaning over himself, reflected in this mirror at his defeat with the situation he's in with his sick wife. But they'll mount cameras to random things, change point of views, cut to things that aren't even in the same scene, all feeding into this anxiety/atmosphere. Balanced with beauty sometimes. They'll just whip out the natural landscape of the UK and really show it off, which definitely wasn't a part of 28 Days, with it being so much in the city. It doesn't kind of have that organic beauty. We're introduced to Spike's mum, who we later find out has a horrible form of cancer that is giving her hallucinations, memory loss, nosebleeds, the whole lot. Clever mirroring of the idea of the rage virus. You lose your body and brain to the main antagonistic force of the film, this virus. But then this is kind of a harsh reminder that there are plenty of real-life sicknesses that can cause just as much, if not more damage as these fantastical zombie viruses. Now, I don't know if I'm thinking about this or looking into this too much, but this character's named Isla. She has memory loss. She's forgetting who she is, details of her son and mistaking him for her father, which might be part of the idea of the UK kind of losing its identity, losing its memory. Isla, the British Isles. That makes sense to me. And also provides a really believable and sympathetic motivation for our main character, who's only a 12-year-old boy. So some of the more wacky decisions he makes are believable when you're thinking about this is a 12-year-old, his mum is sick, he just wants to help his sick mum. That's the most understandable, empathetic motivation that I really don't have any issues with. So Spike and his dad go off to the mainland for his first time in this ceremony, where they mention that it's unusual for a 12-year-old, someone so young, to go. They prefer if they're 14 or 15, but they're convinced he's ready, and I guess through the events of the movie we do see that he is ready. This is when the war poem starts playing, spliced with all this stock footage, again evoking these ideas of something long forgotten, memories of the past. Love all these shots of this walkway. So fantastical and big and unique. Love this choice to show these old maps, give it some pathos, some history, and again with the middle-aged fantasy type vibe. It also makes sense just on a plot level that Spike and his dad would be talking about this, seeing as he's never left the island. He's making sure he understands the timing of the tide, what it means. Really cool scene. Some of the best stuff in the movie is to do with this. The anxiety and creepy atmosphere created by this kind of montage, almost seemingly random splices of all these clips. And this one surprised me too, because I'm pretty sure this is actually from 28 Weeks Later, another reference, where they're kind of overlaying these shots of snipers, but then intersplicing it with this old age bow and arrow stuff. Very cool. Love that tone that it creates. So unsettling. More world building stuff. I really like the world building in the movie. Makes it feel believable. When they get off the island, this is where they kind of get their wood, their resources for fire, for arrows, for tools, whatever. Some more bizarre creative choices I think work very well as far as creating a unsteady, unpredictable, anxious feeling to the location. Even though we haven't seen the main characters interact with the zombies yet, they're just like crossing a bridge. And you get these infrared shots of the zombies at night, kind of freaking around, communicating, doing some scary, unsettling stuff. And again, with the flag and imagery sprinkled in there. Then we do get some more world-building stuff with the first proper introduction of these bloater-type zombies. I'm glad they don't call them that. That's like an issue I have with the movie that I'll bring up shortly. I like that it shows that there are kind of different types of them, established establishes how they've been surviving, eating worms, crawling around on the floor. Doesn't quite have the same fear factor that they do in Days Later, where they're sprinting around like crazy. But you get to that. I like the sense of escalation. And also establishing idea that there's like a kid zombie. There's like the dad and the mum, and then it shows this little kid. Well, it's hard to tell because there's so much makeup on prosthetics and blood and goo all over it. Unfortunately, in this video, I'm not going to be able to show some of the more extreme gore and stuff like that, just for the nature of YouTube. And nudity, actually. There's a lot of nudity in the movie. Good creative choice. It's been decades since the virus kicked off. It makes sense to me that they would just be naked. But yeah, this kid zombie, there's definitely some through line with that we potentially don't know all of the context for yet, because this is supposedly the first part of a trilogy. We'll see about that. Don't love the CG deer, but I do love what it brings to the movie. Again, with the world building, kind of explains what these things have been eating, what our main characters can hunt and eat. These deer populations would get out of control without humans hunting them. We have no natural predators that can take out deer. And the way it comes back with the trampling stampede being what makes the house they take refuge in fall down in a few scenes' time. I like all the scenes in this house. On the first watch, I didn't quite realize that the zombie hanging here has the name Jimmy carved into his torso. There are a lot of sprinklings of Jimmy stuff throughout the film that does make it feel like less random, less of a surprise when he shows up towards the end. I'm excited to see what they do with that. The way they communicate the passage of time is really clever. They'll show other parts of the community, build up the lore a little bit, showing the kids practicing with the bow and arrows, again feeding into this idea of regression or the legacy of history being forgotten to time with how it relates to contemporary UK. This is a real shot in the film, one of the infrared Samson shots, I believe. It's when he rips the head off the deer and attaches it to a tree. Gruesome scene. Infrared choices off-putting and creepy, and then the way it's edited. This is a moment where there is a wider shot, and just for a couple frames, it will zoom in and kind of throw you off. And the whole film is sporadic like that. I know it's too much for some people, but that maximalism, I think, really sells this world, alongside a lot of the action with the iPhone camera rigs they won't shut up about, which I think are a cool stylistic choice to kind of highlight and put you in scenes in a way that emphasizes things in an unusual way. On a technical level, I think it's pretty much flawless. If every movie had this much dedication to the actual filmmaking side of it, trying to push boundaries, be weird, I think we'd be in a good place. So now we're introduced to the alpha concept, a name I absolutely hate, and the film itself even kind of pokes fun at, saying that it sounds like a grind setter stock market douchebag term. But that's just crossing the line for me. It's like making it too video gamey. Don't they have like alpha zombies in Dying Light and video games like that? Okay, they're not called alpha zombies, they're called the volatiles in Dying Light, but point still stands. Volatiles is probably a better name than the alphas. It reminds me of like there's always a video game enemy called like the Brute. It's just too much. But as far as how the alphas are actually visually communicated, they are intimidating, they're scary. They feel like, oh, you just wouldn't stand a chance against these human growth hormone, roid-raged, ripped, big-cocked monsters. I also thought this was a really cool shot to establish the way they have changed, as far as they've still got the kind of shambling sprinters that run around, but they do have these bigger, more thoughtful hunters that just stand and watch. And that to me felt creepier than some of the zombie lore that's like barely expanded upon in something like 28 weeks. Especially with how I feel like by the end of the trilogy, if we do get all three, I feel like the Samson character's gonna get a lot of development, has more in store that we have yet to find out about. That's one of the big caveats with this movie for me. If the Bone Temple can land a bunch of payoffs for what they set up in this movie, it could retroactively improve elements of this film, especially if they nail that Jimmy character. This might seem like a random shot to have grabbed, but the moment when Spike and his dad are escaping into the loft of this abandoned house, going back to the creative choices, the visual presentation, this shot right here is from the zombie's perspective. It's like a POV shot, handheld. And I think it's the only time in the movie they do that. But the way it communicates the space, the tension, I never felt overwhelmed or confused, despite how chaotic and scatterbrained it can seem. Yeah, back to this passage of time, love this shot, with the setting sun, returning to the tree, with just the one lone alpha waiting. Ominous, creepy, really like this touch. This is when we first see hints of Dr. Kelson. Spike wants to know more about what's going on over there, but his dad, Jamie. God, there are lots of J names, aren't there? Jamie, the Jimmies, and Cillian Murphy's character from the original was also called Jim. But yeah, I like the lore of this. Interesting dream sequence here. Another infrared nightmare scene. And it's interesting that this dream is presented in the same way that the infrared stuff previously seemed to indicate just something that was happening at some point, whereas this is very much in our main character's head with this fitting, creepy, dreamlike imagery these falling stones indicating some kind of rising tension, this fear for his mother, all of it. Now, maybe the most beautiful set piece in the film, and they're being chased by the Alpha, trying to make it back at night. You get this gorgeous sheet of stars. Love the execution of this, the way music is used. Starts off kind of triumphant, gets scarier, tension builds, have this enormous murmuration of birds as a big part of it, making it feel like Lord of the Rings or something. Again, with the medieval fantasy type stuff, probably the best set piece in the film. And for a lot of people at the moment, I guess it peaks. And I'll agree in the sense that I don't really have any major criticisms at this point. It's intriguing, the world is scary, feels like a real accomplishment to have made it back, just by the skin of their teeth. Then you introduce the element of Spike not enjoying the way his dad is overhyping him, bringing up these stories that make him sound more efficient than perhaps he is, and going back to this transition of child into man. He's drinking booze, he's partying, and unfortunately catches his dad cheating on his wife, which tears him apart as it would many 12-year-olds. This minor character catches Spike up on Dr. Kelson, which, compounded with what he just saw his dad do, breaks his heart because he thinks, what do you mean there's been this doctor available for all this time and you haven't taken her to the doctor? So obviously he brings it to his dad. His dad describes an event where he saw him decades ago, or 15, 16 years ago or something like that, where Dr. Kelson, for whatever reason, had lined up all these bodies and was doing something that Aaron Taylor Johnson's character wanted nothing to do with. And I feel like anyone in this situation would see this and be like, nah, bye. Setting up Dr. Kelson to be a scarier, more threatening character than perhaps he is. I didn't love this scene on my first watch, but it didn't bother me at all on the rewatch. Just like anyone transitioning into adulthood, they're gonna figure things out about their parents. They're not gonna be this idolized, perfect thing in their head forever. This mess of a situation that this family is trapped in does give enough motivation for all of them. It doesn't feel two-dimensional with how they're treating the Jamie character. Yeah, he has flaws, but he's also shown to really care about his son, wants to protect him, big him up in a way any father would. And the situation with the cancer doesn't justify him cheating, but I feel like a lot of people in his situation would make the same mistake. So I really hope we see more of him, because he definitely has an incomplete journey or arc. It's all about Spike. He's kind of the only character that really gets a through line. Maybe him and his mum. Again, with the tattered flag. Now's when the film takes a pretty big shift, and it loses a lot of people. And there are moments of it that do lose me, but I like its core underlying through line with what it does to Spike as a character, the emotional highs it manages to hit in unexpected ways, but some of the logic stuff here is pretty whack, or just glossed over in a way that's like, what? You're putting all this meticulous world building in, and then you're just betraying it with some of these weird choices, which I'll get into in more detail shortly. So Spike kind of causes this fire, convinces the guards on the watchtower to leave their post so he can sneak his mum out, take her to the mainland, try and get her to the doctor. Don't really have an issue with that. Can't get much clearer with the British Brexit commentary with the burning flag. Don't know how I missed this on the first watch. There's a certain level of tension because having a very capable Aaron Taylor Johnson with his son feels like they're inherently a bit safer. But now it's literally a 12-year-old who's been here once and his cancer-ridden mum who barely knows what's going on because she's so ill. Very cool shot here, by the way. Looks like a painting. But that tension is kind of what starts making things a little bit goofier for me. It's not quite so bad yet. Gets kind of worse as it goes along. But here's another Jimmy tease. Behold Jimmy, he's coming with the clouds. Something that on first watch will basically have no meaning, but I like the way it's peppered throughout the film. Yeah, a few more of these pictures of the ruins, the traveling. Much like 28 Days, it's kind of an adventure movie at heart, a travel movie. This is when they take refuge in this church. Not my favorite scene, it's okay. This is when more and more questions arise to me as to how on earth are they going to survive? They barely made it out when they're actually equipped for it on that first outing. How are they going to make it through this? Which, right as you start asking those questions, the Swedish soldiers show up. Their lifeboat accidentally drifted to shore, so they're stuck on the island, and we get a brutal scene of most of them being massacred. On my first watch, I was a bit concerned, oh, you're adding a bunch of guns into the mix? That kind of deflates the tension somewhat, but I guess this goes to show that it doesn't really help that much. We're not America, we don't have more guns than people, so it doesn't overtake the bow and arrow combat and that kind of ye old feeling. We get quite an important shot of here is very censored because they're all naked, but the one in the center is explicitly shown to be pregnant, which will come back into play in a big way later, one of the bigger question marks I have around this film. The way the information sits is quite exciting, especially on that first watch, but also befuddling, because you're still trying to figure out, okay, what am I being shown that's literal, what is figurative, what is from a different point in time, what's important to take away from this. So it almost demands a rewatch. Even if you didn't like it. Comes back round a bit for me with the Angel of the North scene. While I've mentioned some of the plot details that don't really come together for me, I think the dialogue for the most part is very good. There's no piece of dialogue that rips me out of the film. Feeding in again to this theme of history and legacy with the line that she says about how staring at it is like staring into the future because it's so well made, so well built. Will stand the test of time like pyramids. It's like, is that what the UK is at this point? Is it just a relic? Great way to integrate some maybe less well-known stuff to people outside of the UK. It's quite an incredible sculpture to see in real life. Danny Boyle's really great at incorporating visuals to hammer home what the script is getting at. Isla, at this point, is really finding it difficult to figure out what is real and what isn't. She thinks Spike is her dad. And even though this shot isn't literal, her dad isn't there, obviously. It communicates the emotion she's feeling, the nostalgia that's washing over her. It's really dark and sad. And playing with emotions that I just didn't really associate with 28 Days. But 28 Days does have kind of tonal switch-ups, but it's more so to introduce different types of horror instead of different types of empathy. And from what I read, the idea of this trilogy is that each film is supposed to represent something slightly different, with the first film being about family, the second being about evil, and the third, if it ever gets made, is supposedly about the nature of redemption. So it'll be really nice to see how this film contrasts with this world that's fully dedicated to a story about evil, what they're going to do to poor Spike. But the tenderness, the softness, I really like this as a contrast to that masculinity of the first act or so, where you can see the different skills, the different attitudes and ideas that Spike is picking up from his different parents. This is brilliant. This is like a genius shot. If we're talking about disgusting evil history associated with the UK, you can go no further than oil companies, and taking the S off Shell is so simple but so clever. This was a major scene in the cinema where I was like, what the fuck is going on? How are they surviving this? And I still don't really love it. I'm not going to pretend that I know anything about benzene vapor or whatever they call it, but this was stretching the believability a little bit far for me, even though I like the visuals of the actual vapor itself, and you get some cool shots and editing. I guess now's a good time to shout out the soundtrack by Young Fathers, someone or a band I'm not familiar with, but I've gone through a few of their songs since watching this movie, and they've got some great stuff. But the music they made for this film is so complimentary and covers such a wide range of emotions. Really love the credit music and the music that accompanies the big emotional scene towards the end. A big part of what sells that tone and atmosphere is this music, so shout out to how good of a decision that was to use them. So now we get some of the only levity in the film. I'm glad that they managed to find a way to get it in somewhere, with the Swedish soldier, the only one who survived, bringing the perspective of someone who lives in a contemporary world. They have the internet, they have mobile phones, they have plastic surgery, and Spike's just like, what? What are you talking about? Which is reinforced by everything, even down to the costume design, where everything that the main characters are wearing are aged and kind of locked in time, locked in a point of history that just isn't contemporary anymore. For the small part he plays in the movie, I really like what this soldier adds, and also just increases the believability of how they can survive. He has a weapon, he's a grown-ass man, he's not 12 years old, presumably has training. This surgery joke is funny. And that was when things get really weird, with this train set piece, where we return to the idea of this pregnant infected, the one we saw earlier, where Isla helps her give birth, cuts the umbilical cord, which on my first rewatch was like, I wish you were a bit more paranoid about the blood and the infection aspect, because that's something that's really tense and scary about 28 Days, is how a single droplet of blood feels like a huge threat. Entire characters' lives are changed by a single drop of blood in that movie, where here people are flipping around, exploding them, and cutting umbilical cords and all of it. I don't know, I don't love that. And this is definitely one of the threads that I imagine is going to be a big thing they pull at for the trilogy, if I had to guess. The implications of there being a pregnant infected are myriad. Are they like fucking? Are they regularly giving birth? They mention that the baby's not infected. Are they going for like an Ellie Last of Us cure type thing? I highly doubt it. That'd be really disappointing. Then, of course, the further implications of Samson showing up, drawn by the gunfire of the Swedish dude shooting the mother zombie, I mean. He kind of holds up the body, seems to have some kind of connection to it, chases them through the train, tears the Swedish guy's head off. Great sound design and visual effects, practical effects for the 3 or 4 times that this character tears people's spines out with their head throughout the movie. Quite fun. And then we finally get Dr. Kelson in the picture, who saves them with his morphine dart or whatever it is. While I don't know, I need to see where they take this baby stuff in the train scene. It does kind of feel like it comes out of nowhere, but it picks up for me when we go to Dr. Kelson and the Bone Temple. He's a really cool character. It's almost an exact inverse of 28 Days Later, where when the more vulnerable characters meet up with the British soldiers, who then deflate the tension as far as, oh, they're like trained soldiers, they're going to be able to survive a lot easier, but then they reveal that maybe they're a threat in and of themselves. This is the inverse, where he seems like a threat on his face, but up close he's actually benevolent, tender, caring. I love that he smears himself in iodine because he's figured out that the virus hates it. Gives a bunch of new law drops, talking about how Samson has been in the area for about 3 years, so he has some kind of pacifist slant to him, which I don't know, can get a little bit goofy, but this is another character I'm sure they're going to expand on. I don't know how you would have a sequel called The Bone Temple and not have him be a major part in it. If I had to place bets, I think the Jimmies are going to kind of groom Spike into their gang and maybe convince Spike to kill the Doctor, leading into some kind of redemption in the third movie somehow. But I don't know, I'm just spitballing. Love his character though, love his dialogue talking about the dead language of Latin. Memento mori, remember death, remember you must die. I really have a weakness for when characters start going into personal philosophies and when it's communicated that a character has some belief system or thoughts that dictate the way they act, and how that contrasts with the different characters. There's a lot of potential with what they can do with him in the sequel. I hope they do it. The Bone Temple itself is ridiculously cool. As far as like a practical set they have built and put together, it looks incredible. And this is where it's really gonna test how much you can suspend your disbelief, I guess, because well, for me, I felt like the tone and that kind of fantasy feeling was only cemented by this location. I don't think I'd blame someone for finding the whole skull stuff a bit far-fetched, but I don't know. You seen those pictures of the pile of bison skulls from like 1892? Like, humans can just do the craziest of things that feel more like fantasy than reality. But I think it's a very cool location. I want to see more of it. I like seeing his camp, establishing that this river is like a natural barricade. He's built these rope bridges in order to get across and keep them out. So then Dr. Kelson does what he can to diagnose Isla with cancer, which concludes with her deciding for Dr. Kelson to euthanize her, basically, so she has more of a dignifying death on her own terms, where they make the decision to drug Spike, and the Doctor boils her down into a skull. Something which kind of doesn't work for me on paper, but through the execution of how they deliver it, works for me. I love his line about like the best deaths being peaceful, where you leave each other in love. And this like emotional crescendo just comes out of nowhere and is so unexpected. The music choice, the dreamy shot compositions, the emotional confusion that the main character is losing someone so important to him, but having to accept that it really is the best outcome for her, all things considered. It's a big character-defining moment, and him climbing the tower is a beautiful moment. It's triumphant, sad, earnest, and fucked up. As we start rounding down now, we see the continued threat that Samson seems to be giving the area, nearly killing Dr. Kelson and saved by Spike. Could have done with a little bit more exposition about why he keeps him alive, because, I mean, if Spike wasn't here, he would have been killed. Maybe they'll get into his philosophy more in the sequel, but I'm still left scratching my head as to why they keep this ultra threat around when we're shown multiple times that they could deal with him, which is when Dr. Kelson decides, I think you and the baby need to go. And the execution of how we get to this next part is maybe my biggest issue in the entire movie, as far as like structure and mechanics of how everything fit together. After Dr. Kelson says it, he doesn't really escort him or help him, and it just kind of cuts to him kind of casually delivering this newborn baby to the Holy Island, and no one notices and he doesn't have any issues. Like, this is a 12-year-old and a newborn zombie baby. This felt just too glossed over and convenient. Just wish like Dr. Kelson maybe had helped him to the shoreline or close or something to make it feel a bit more believable and not hurt the tension or fear that was baked into the world for the previous part of the movie. We cut to 28 days later. Spike is on his own, hunting fish, surviving. We see that, I guess, Spike snuck up to the entrance of the Holy Island, put the baby hanging here, and no one saw anything or hear anything. They do show earlier that the guards on the watchtower are sleeping at night, so I guess that maybe is how they explain that, but that doesn't really stop it from being kind of clunky. He named the baby after his mum. Funny shot of his dad chasing after, and his hopelessness at the situation that he's stuck in, losing his son and his wife. Definitely need to see more from him. He's an incomplete character. Hopefully he comes back. Right, now one of the other crazier moments, the Jimmies. The Jimmy setup payoff. So especially if you're not from the UK, this would be extra confusing. Not only are they all color coordinated like the Teletubbies from the beginning, that Jimmy himself was watching, but they're all wearing Jimmy Savile tracksuits, jewelry, and wigs, and seem to have some kind of cult built around pop culture from his childhood, as well as the upside down cross kind of indicating a more evil or satanic underlying threat to what he is bringing, which matched with the Jimmy Savile thing will almost definitely play a huge role as far as what to expect from the character. Someone who on his face is a huge philanthropist celebrity, and before this character even knew in the movie itself, because of the outbreak happening in 2002. No one in this world knew how evil Jimmy Savile was yet, so that gives it an interesting, weird texture. Yeah, I love that reincorporation of the upside down cross from the beginning. Don't know if I really needed them flipping around the way they do. I liked how they were using the bags and the like brutality of it, but I'm very intrigued what they're going to do with this. It's obviously going to be the focus of the next movie, and I think it all kind of hinges on this character, who Jack O'Connell himself has described this character as the most menacing and evil person he's ever played. So I really hope they deliver on that. It is an awkward ending as far as a tease. Leaves way more questions than answers. So to me that depends how it's going to pay off in future movies, where they're going to take it. While obviously not based on a book, I have a Dune type caveat where how much I liked Dune Part 1 was in part dependent on how they paid it off in Dune Part 2. If Dune Part 2 didn't come together for whatever reason, why would you ever watch Dune Part 1? It's not quite as extreme as that here. Spike does get his own arc, but it still will feel like an incomplete or unfinished story if this trilogy doesn't come together or doesn't make enough money or whatever. So I imagine they're going to do some kind of surrogate father type dynamic, have the culty stuff, underlying evil, maybe radicalized Spike or something along these lines. I don't know if anyone outside of Sony was begging for this to be a trilogy. I probably would have preferred just a one-off film. But if we're doing this and it's all written by Garland, I'm intrigued. I think it pretty much all hinges on the second film, but we don't have that much longer to wait for actually. It's what, January 2026 it's coming. Already got a trailer for it. But they're gonna want to look for a bigger return than what this one got. Maybe the digital sales will help boost it somewhat, but we'll see. It would be really disappointing to get the sequel and not do well because of how divisive this film is. Then you just don't get the redemptive part of the main character's story. I don't know, we'll have to wait and see. I have a feeling they're gonna do structurally what they did in this first movie again, for the equivalent Jimmy scene at the end of the third act of the Bone Temple, I assume. Cillian Murphy's Jim will show up in a similar way to this guy. We just don't know. We don't know what the plan is. I really hope it comes together. And just talking through this film gives me a lot of appreciation for it. I think it's clever and a lot of the important aspects I'm looking for from films. Some clunky stuff here and there, but overall, the pacing of it, the way it just flies by, under 2 hours, like how condensed it is with these main characters, only like 5 or 6 important characters. This is good stuff. And I hope if you made it this far into this video, even if you didn't like the movie, maybe you could appreciate some new things about it. Let me know your thoughts, if you've revisited it, if you're so put off by that first viewing that you'll never watch it again and somehow prefer Weeks. If Weeks was made with this kind of dedication to the style and the filmmaking, I'd probably like it more, but it feels like a Hollywood sequel that kind of missed the whole point of what made the original cool. Whereas this feels like a similar energy and has such a strong voice as far as Danny Boyle direction. Feels like an Alex Garland script, which to me is a positive. I like his movies. I think he's got a lot of range, but again, I know he's quite divisive. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. See you on the next vid. Bye!